Welcome to the iWest seminar series. My name is Andrea Maestas. I'm part of the iWest team at Los Alamos National Lab, and I'll be your host for today. For those of you who may be new to the seminar series, I'd like to start with a brief introduction to iWest. iWest is an initiative funded by the U.S. Department of Energy to provide communities across 6 Intermountain states with data, tools, and information for energy transition planning. iWest takes a place-based approach, which frames everything we do in the context of the geographical, environmental, and demographic attributes of the region. We also take a technology-neutral approach that explores energy options and opportunities across numerous symbiotic energy economies. And those technologies are assessed in tandem with societal readiness, which we believe is key to ensuring an equitable energy transition. And those assessments are done through community engagement and coalition building to encourage regional partnerships. Today's seminar is entitled Engaging Energy Communities Where They Are, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Sonrisa Lucero. She's joining us from the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Economic Impact and Diversity, where she serves as a special advisor for stakeholder engagement. Sonrisa is a Stanford University graduate with a degree in environmental systems engineering. She is a lifelong activist for social justice and has held several positions in which she has worked to advance equitable sustainability and climate policy. Thank you for being with us today, Sonrisa. And with that, please take it away.
Great, thank you so much. How is everybody doing today? I hope everybody's alive and awake out there in the world. I won't have an opportunity really to see you all that much, so feel free to do reactions, throw on your cameras, do anything like that as we go. It could be a long time hearing one person speak, and so anytime we can break things up, that'd be good. So feel free to ask questions and all of those kinds of good things. All right, so Andrea and I were speaking a little bit ahead of time about what would be valuable information to share with you all today. And so the first thing was she really expressed interest in this Energy Justice to the People roadshow effort that our team here at the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity has been leading at DOE. And I'll dig in a little bit into it and hopefully tell the story also about how DOE is trying to have procedural and distributive justice also be part of the outcomes of the work that we're doing on the ground. And these conversations and these engagements that we've had with communities in where they are has been a big part of trying to bring that information and that process to them, where they can hopefully start accessing DOE resources in a better way and engaging with the resources back. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. And let's see if my slide will advance. There we go. All right, so we have the Energy Justice to the People Roadshow that we started in the late spring and are working our way really around the Gulf Coast right now and around the bend for those Tejanos that are in the audience, the coastal bend. And so we started over on the border of the Rio Grande Valley in Texas and moved. So we started in Alamo, and my Teams, even though I shut it down, is still barking at me. Let me make this do not disturb so you do not hear anything. Okay, so we had started over there in where it says the Rio Grande Valley. It's actually three cities that we went to. We started in Edinburgh, Texas, Alamo, Texas, and then Brownsville, Texas. And so all of these 3 locations are right there on the border. For those that are familiar with the colonias in Texas, this was a big part of the visits that we did there. The colonias, for those that don't know, and I kind of knew of them, but didn't really understand what they were prior to this trip. But these are areas of, and really in a way in which Texas has grown or develops land in certain parts along the border and other areas more interior as well, where people are able to acquire land, but don't necessarily get the infrastructure that they need to live there. And so you have properties and houses being built oftentimes by the people themselves, generationally, pieces at a time, bit by bit, room by room, get added on over the years. Not necessarily built to code, maybe likely don't have access to sewer, stormwater, drainage, sometimes even power. It takes a while to get there. And so it is an area that's been forgotten by our energy system. And so that was kind of where we started. And then as we moved up and around the bend, we started going to places where the energy system is overdeveloped. And it's really the fence line. And when you really want to have that definition of a fence line community, that was where we ended up being. And so, and then we are heading out to Cancer Alley next month. So a big part of this was really about helping people see and feel like they matter, that DOE's processes, that our programs, that our infrastructure really do also include them, and that we are trying to get resources out into those places. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that as we get going. So I already mentioned the different stops here that we've had. I want to highlight the second stop that we did in Port Arthur. That was the last stop that we did. We're about to head out to Cancer Alley. We just did that in June. This was a massive effort. We had 22 DOE representatives, and you can see that from like 8 different program offices across DOE, as well as the secretary and her team. We had different federal family partners that we brought with us. We took HUD and EPA, and that was really important because a lot of the areas here in Port Arthur, and particularly Lake Charles and Louisiana, have not recovered from hurricanes. And a lot of their issues, these are intersectional issues that these communities are dealing with. It's not just an energy issue. It's not just something that DOE can solve when we go down there. This has got to be, a whole of government, a whole of institutions, really, not even federal government alone can do this, but we're starting in bite-sized pieces here. By bringing in some of the most relevant federal family siblings that can also help with resources for the community members that were there. So HUD and EPA joined us on this as well. And then we brought a philanthropic partner with us to also kind of help fill in the gaps. So in any case, all 4 eventual stops have the same goals. And that's where we're really trying to bring together the DOE kind of like that intersecting kind of melting pot of groups together. I kind of like to say like nobody lives a single agency life. No one has a single issue life. And so we're trying to bring everybody together and use DOE's convening power to really bring these multilateral discussions and roundtables together where people can really start talking about what are the levers that need to move and get pulled here in order for us to be able to actually make a difference on the ground, and how can federal funding be maximized as a part of that. We also want to prepare the communities themselves, help them at least in these engagements, be aware of the resources that are going to be available to them. So we're capacity building only in the information sharing part of it, the training element of it, not in the funding element yet, but really starting to do a little bit of that capacity building and really begin those relationships between federal family folks and people on the ground. So how are we actually becoming, creating a conduit for communication between everybody there? And then this is one I'll dig into a little bit more, because this is the main crux of how DOE is implementing the Justice 40 initiative and the way that we really are trying to achieve distributional equity and procedural equity. And that is through our community benefit plans. And so we want to make sure that we're making sure everybody knows about those, both the community groups on the grounds, the organizations and institutions that would likely receive the majority of DOE's funding. And then finally, making sure that we're letting people know what they can apply for directly. There's a lot of funding that DOE has that community groups can actually pursue under Uncle Bill and Aunt Ira on their own. And so we have about roughly $100 billion that DOE has received from our Theo and Thea, Bill and Ira. And so we like to joke over here that the bipartisan infrastructure law is Uncle Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act is Aunt Ira. So anyway, I'm going to imagine everybody's laughing in the void over there. And so there's a lot of those opportunities that are directly available to community members, those $100 billion. And so we want to make sure that they understand what money is available to them. So how did we do this? How are we trying to achieve those goals? We were doing that through experiential witnessing, really getting out on the ground, trying to see, smell, touch, hear, and feel what it is that community members are experiencing. We want to make sure that we are listening and getting to hear the word from the ground, hearing how people are, what they're struggling with and what they want to see, and also what's going great. We wanted to do relationship building, help break bread with people, build some of that trust that government is so notoriously bad at having with community groups, and really start helping people to create a vision for themselves about what an equitable energy future could look like. What does this transition look like? We really wanted to start that two-way communication and not just us talk at people, and also not just have that, or are we just going to listen and then we're going to walk away, but really start having a conversation back and forth. Again, share about the community benefit plans, like I already mentioned, and then really being intentional about how we convened people, who we put around a table, what kind of conversations we seated for them to have, and figure out what are some of those levers that actually need to get pulled that I already mentioned. And then create a little bit of urgency and time boundedness by actually having an event. It puts a lot of onus in getting people motivated to do something that might otherwise kind of languish on a to-do list. Like so many of us have really long and big to-do lists that way. And so some of the elements involved listening sessions. We had funding workshops. We would, where needed, have Spanish language, and we even had Vietnamese language opportunities for different learning sessions. We had different pull-asides with elected officials and industry as well, and a lot of meetings with environmental justice and business leaders within the area. And now I'm going to share a little, and I also want to share a little bit about what we saw. A lot of this really sticks with you. You can't go to some of these places and leave unchanged. And that was also part of the hope too, is that some of our DOE staff would actually carry these places back with them in their hearts and their souls and their fibers of their being. And literally sometimes in your, you do carry it back in your body, just from the health exposure things. The second time I went to Port Arthur, I started to have some weird skin things happening, and it's I would get very strong headaches going to some of these places. Just the environmental exposure that you get in different places is really profound. And so being able to have that be sitting with our staff as you are making decisions back in our cubes or home offices or in our buildings is actually very impactful and very important. And so in any case, some of the things that we saw communities that are actually lacking energy and water infrastructure, in particular in the colonias. You see there the one street light being powered by a solar panel. That is a colonia that's a more mature one. It's an older one, and was actually able to start working on getting street lighting now. Others, they would flood regularly because they don't have stormwater provisions. There's other areas and communities that don't even have electricity yet. And then we also saw communities that are, like I said before, on the fence line or the water line of some of the industry as well. It's not advancing. There we go. So this is a fence line that is in Groves, Texas, right, and Port Arthur. You can see one of the flares is going in pretty intensely, and the communities are right there across the street. And so this is what we mean when we talk about a fence line community. And so these are the places we took our DOE staff and got them to be able to actually interact a bit with what we were seeing there. Now let me see if I can actually advance slides. In that picture there on the left with the playground and the facility behind it, there was actually an explosion at that facility and I'm already forgetting my years, 2019, I believe. And so it was a petrochemical facility that was there. In the house with, the house with the tank behind it, we spoke with Miss Payne, who lives in that house, who's a retired teacher. She doesn't know what's actually even in that floating tank behind her. But then there's also these really bright spots and bright stories as well. This is one of the environmental justice leaders that we met, Hilton Kelly, and he worked on transforming the SIP funds from EPA. So when EPA finds some of the companies there, you're able to reinvest those dollars back locally. And they've created not just a playground that you see in the foreground and community garden, which you see right behind him, but also across the street there is a health clinic and community meeting space. So, and he wants to use some property that's adjacent to this spot for a solar charging area, it's basically a resiliency hub, but he doesn't call it that. He calls it a solar power community center or something along those lines. I'm forgetting the exact name right now. And he was a recipient of, or partnered with one of the recipients of technical assistance from DOE in our Solar Energy Innovation Network. And so they have been working on the plans and the design for that. We also took a little bit of ourselves on a driving tour. The bottom left picture that you see there is an LNG facility that DOE has recently permitted. So this is allowing liquid natural gas to be exported around the world. And then the top two pictures, of course, is more of the industry that we saw over in Sulphur, Louisiana, which is right adjacent to Lake Charles and Mossville, for anyone that's familiar with that issue. And so what we heard from folks was that, some communities need electricity and energy affordability is still a life necessity. A lot of people are, and really, as the world is continuing to heat up, air conditioning is starting to no longer be a luxury. It's actually a health and safety item, infrastructure for a home. And so that also has an expense with it. And so being able to afford energy is now important for your safety and health within your house in a way that, it always has been, but in a really expanded way now, and ever so increasing way. For many families, immigration status is a concern for what resources people will be able to receive. Someone told us in the Rio Grande Valley that, if you're not stealing money from a poor person, you're not working hard enough. And so we're hearing that there's a lot of fraud, and in particular on solar fraud for us. And so that was a real big surprise for us to hear that. So that was something that we brought back and are working on. There's definitely concerns about DOE greenwashing technologies that community members don't want. There's a lot of opposition to carbon capture and storage, as well as hydrogen. There's ever-present concerns about industry's impact on their health and the quality of the environment. And then also navigating the DOE systems in order to access any kind of funding was bewildering. And so there's definitely a lot of questions about how can they actually access these funds. And then but there's also a really strong desire for DOE's participation. And they really do want us there. And they really do want to participate and be a part of this new energy future. But they, and so they definitely were grateful and welcoming that we were there. You'll see also, this one's in Port Arthur with our Secretary Granholm speaking with Hilton Kelly. That's the site of the future solar resiliency hub. We're hoping that he can find funding for it. You're seeing some of the roundtable there at the top right with a diverse group of labor, energy businesses, government, environmental justice leaders, elected officials, academia. And then I think that middle right picture is actually really important. When you go into some of these areas, you find out like what a lot of the local dynamics are. And a lot of these places, people were just like, you know, this is being flooded by people not from here. This is being overtaken by industry. You know, there's a lot of suspicion of each other. And so this was actually a moment where the secretary asked everybody, like, who here is actually from Port Arthur? And, you know, people started to raise their hand, and everyone had a chance to look around, and they're like, oh, okay, this is actually a room of people that are from here, and it's not being co-opted by other outside interests. And so that was actually a really important moment for us. And it's something to kind of remember as you get on the ground, that you really do start to deal with the local issues, and you need to make sure that you have translators, not like language translators, but those two, but you have translators that can help you navigate the issues that are happening on the ground. All of these efforts, all of these engagements took months to plan and weeks to plan, and relationships that we had built outside of the effort and really nurtured to make sure that we could have a really valuable experience on the ground and actually fill the room. And the rooms were filled not because we invited people, because local people invited people. This was Lake Charles session. In Lake Charles, we found that there is such a hunger for people to be able to engage with the government, and we have EPA and HUD with us. They didn't even want to hear what we had to say. They just wanted to talk to us the entire time, and we had to adjust on the fly and make space just to expand our listening sessions, because people were just really had a lot to say and just really wanted to be heard. And so navigating the dynamics in the room and those moments when people were, you know, visibly, you know, frustrated and just wanting to, they're just like, people never come here, and you're here, like, we just have so much pent up, you know, complaints and voices that we want to put out into the space, and give us, you know, now that you're giving us the time, like let's really dig in deeper. And so we had to adjust and make sure that we were able to do that. You're also seeing in that top left picture, that's Alejandro Moreno, who is the I'm forgetting his title right now. The PDAS, not the PDAS, he's the head of EDRE basically. And so it was, we had leadership with us this entire time, is my point. We had really high ups up in OSED. We had David Crane, who's the undersecretary for the Office of Infrastructure on the day with the secretary in Port Arthur. Alejandro was there with us the entire time. We've had Henry McCoy, who leads the Office of State and Community Energy Programs. Of course, Director Shalonda Baker, who's the convener and the lead of our office and the secretarial advisor on equity. And so this is not just like engagement staff going out. This is engagement staff creating a moment and a space and an opportunity for community and DOE leadership and DOE program leadership staff being able to work together. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I had a video with that one. But a lot of this work is building trust and trying to advance that work. So having conversations with the elected leaders, digging deep, and having some hard conversations. It's kind of interesting in that bottom right picture, you actually see the head of our carbon management office, Noah Deitch, speaking with Rebecca Hinojosa with the Sierra Club, who is very much opposed to carbon management. And so, you know, I don't know how well that conversation is going right there, but, you know, they're definitely having an opportunity to actually talk back and forth. And so that's a pretty huge moment that we had there. So I'll stop myself. Keep going. So we've put all this together on our roadshow websites. We had site characterizations ahead of time of each of the places. We tried to educate ourselves about what was happening on the ground before we went. We shared that with all of our delegation. We share it back out with the community groups. We created our own community-facing funding opportunities document. That's that middle one that you see. It all has QR codes so everybody can scan it, just like the menu. at your local restaurant now. And we try to make sure that all of the resources are easily accessible on the website. We definitely got press in all of these different spots. We created blogs for where we went. There's a ton of teamwork and everyone kind of pitching in, you know, Deputy Chief of Staff up there working on slides, our Deputy Director, you know, helping out with the presentation. We have one of our chiefs digging in and like pulling together the handouts at the table. So like it was really just an all hands on deck type of moment. But we were able to build a lot of camaraderie while we were out there, whether it was by, you know, out on some boat tours. And it's been a really great chance to make sure that we can connect with everybody. In those bottom left pictures, it's community members that we got to hang out with. Bottom right, you see EPA folks with us. And top right one is one of the community members reciting a poem that he wrote. And we have a commitment to come back, not just to the Rio Grande Valley, but also to all of the locations that we are now in relationship with. And so this is going to be a long-term kind of commitment for us. And we have other places that we're going as well. So we've kind of started the Cancer Alley trip. We've reformatted the roadshows now. Instead of doing these massive 1.5 day engagements with, you know, dozens of staff, we're doing some smaller and more kind of frequent visits to places. So Cancer Alley right now, we're going to have 3 different stops in the falls, 3 little bite-sized chunks. We've done the first of those about 3 weeks ago. We have another one coming up in October and another in November. And then next year we'll hit out into the Midwest. And so our office has really been trying to implement that Justice 40 initiative for the Biden-Harris administration for the DOE, but every single office has that responsibility of executing it out on the ground. And we really have to work with them to make sure that that is what happens. So why don't I pause here and see what kind of questions or comments there are. I have additional slides on both community benefit plans as well as the funding, community-facing funding opportunities. But I want to make sure that we can engage a little bit and we can take a break from a lecture. So any questions or comments or thoughts from folks?
Babs, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. Thank you. I'm wondering, first question, you know, to what extent there is, you know, air and water quality monitoring, and you know, is that if there is, you know, well, I'm sure there is, but how well that's shared with the community. Sometimes people believe facts rather than.
Yeah. It's you know, that was actually a really challenging part of the trip because and we're not the EPA. And a lot of the concerns that we're inviting are maybe energy system concerns or related to energy use and structure, but we don't monitor them, right? And I think that's something that's a misunderstanding of, we have no regulatory authority, we have no, you know, DOE's we're really the research shop, we're the lab, we're kind of figuring out the next generation of energy, not even the one that's, you know, nothing that's on the shelf. Like we're hardly even doing solar to some extent now, right? Because it's been handed over to commercialization. So we're trying to get technologies mature enough that the commercial and private sector market can take over their deployment. And there's very little that we actually regulate. We have that small amount that I was saying in LNG. We have a very limited export permitting element there. We have a little bit on appliances that we do for appliance efficiency, but that's about it. And so otherwise we're kind of, you know, this is the first time we're taking off the lab coats and actually getting out into community a little bit. Yeah. And so that was actually a real challenge for us because we're going to the places that are most impacted. We're inviting conversations about environmental injustice, and we're utilizing the CJEST, the Climate and Environmental Justice Screening Tool produced by the Council on Environmental Quality as a part of the the mechanism in which we're choosing communities. And so we're going to these places, as you see in these pictures, that have huge environmental consequences. So we had to defer some of that over to EPA and say, okay, the monitoring, and luckily we have people with us that know a lot about this. I'm not necessarily the pro on those, but we would say, okay, and also the other thing I will say too is our environmental justice groups on the ground were pretty savvy, and a lot of them had already been kind of engaging with EPA and all of these things. And the Journey to Justice tour from EPA had been to one or two of these spots ahead of us. And so they already got a lot of their questions and demands for air monitoring out to Administrator Reagan when he was there. And so that took a little bit of pressure off of us, I think. But the issues continue to be air pollution monitoring, water quality monitoring, but also enforcement. I think like a big part of what we were hearing is just that we know that they're violating, but there's no enforcement. Nobody's looking at the monitors. No one's doing anything with that information. And so Dr. Thea Nance, who's the regional administrator for Region 6, which is where we are in all of these locations, has really, and she came with us, I should have said also, to Port Arthur and Lake Charles, is really doing a lot of efforts on enforcement and has her staff now trying to connect with the local community members and to kind of look into these areas and see, okay, what can we be doing better on enforcement, more than just the monitoring. But they're asking for more monitors. And DOE, we have taken that information back too, of like some of our projects, we should be requiring better monitoring for the carbon management program portfolio in particular. And so that's something that we've been discussing on how we can make sure that's better integrated into all the projects. So very, very verbose answer, but hopefully helpful.
Thank you. I had another question, and unless someone else has a question.
I don't see anyone else coming yet, so go for it.
Yeah. So my other question is kind of related, but you mentioned the Sierra Club being opposed to carbon management. I think I might know the reason why, but what?
Yeah. Well, so
Did they tell you?
Yeah, I'll share some of the things that we've been hearing about carbon management in general, more than just the Sierra Club, but from like many of the community groups on the ground. We've been having challenges. So one, there's a concern that's going to prolong the life of fossil fuels, that it gives them a license to operate and to pollute and to continue.
It's enabling. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're most concerned about the other pollutants, not the other co-pollutants to CO2, right? And so if you're capturing just CO2, but none of the other pollutants are getting captured, then there's no change for us. And also, and there's debate about that.
Yeah,
of course. And our engineers say different things, and it depends on the technology you have installed and all of these things. But they also feel like it's a new technology. It's still experimental, and they don't want it to be experimented in their backyard. They're like, go to a community that actually wants it there and have it be experimented and tested and run through its paces there. It's being paired with primacy. So that means the local governments, for those that don't know, instead of EPA being the regulator of the permits for the wells for that technology, both Louisiana and Texas have requested to be the primary enforcer of those permits, and so Louisiana is already moving down that pathway, and EPA is already moving down that pathway and working on an MOU with Louisiana to allow them to have primacy over carbon capture, and Texas has submitted their application, and so a lot of the groups there don't trust that the states will be adequate enforcers of the permits themselves. There's some concern that they would actually pollute, they create a new pollutant that can be toxic to the community groups. They think that it's also could increase costs, and when it's put on a utility, that those costs could get passed on to the consumers, they themselves. And then there's concerns about pipeline and storage safety and impact on natural areas.
Okay.
So those are, I think, the high level points that they're considering.
Thank you.
So why don't I'll keep going, and if others have more questions. Oh, I see a hand. Yeah, before I go. Please.
See me?
Catherine, yes.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. I just, as you're going through this and you use the term, some of the conversations were preparations made by engagement outreach people, but they got the right people to be at the table to listen, sense, experience the conversation. So often in prepping something of this magnitude, you're doing a lot of that outreach focus. And my question is, and it kind of builds on the first question that was asked in terms of scope, how do you keep senior leadership within the realm of not just wanting to fix all problems and not wanting to look responsive, but to really tailor it to what they can and can't do and how to make appropriate referrals? Did you do any internal coaching and or education for senior leadership within your agency to advise them on how to best handle the range of what's coming at?
Yeah, that was something we really paid attention to for the second roadshow quite a bit. We did internal briefings as best as we could, both written as well as in person, like so webinars and so on. So we had kind of like a read ahead book that was available to everybody that went on the entire delegation. Everybody could read about what they were about to see. We had scouted. I had actually personally visited all these places before we went, met with people on the ground before we actually got out there. And so we put a lot of that together and shared that with the community, with the DOE delegation and also our partners. And then we also had some prep meetings. We had both one virtually ahead of time for those that were able to make it. And then we had an additional one in person on the ground on the first night that we were there. And so, and part of it was we didn't want to have that situation like, oh, that's not me. So like hands washed, because there's nothing more frustrating for a community member for them, for you as the government to say, oh, that's not my silo. So that was part of the reason why we brought HUD and EPA with us. And so we could answer more of the questions together and, you know, and left less to be kind of tossed off to another group. And because we had so many offices with us from DOE as well, we were able to kind of cross silos too. So it's like, oh yeah, it's not SCEP or State Community Energy Programs, but that's over here in the Grid Development Office. And so by bringing a diverse team, I think that was also really helpful. And then, of course, for the things that we couldn't answer, instead of just being like, that's not us, we would say, okay, thank you for that point. We will relay it. And then we're on enough interagency groups and we're on enough interdepartmental groups that we can actually share that information to other places.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the prep work that goes into it. And also just I didn't introduce myself. I'm Catherine Becker, calling from New Mexico Environment Department. And I've just had a lot of challenges trying to bring people up to speed on Indian country and colonias and trying to understand the lay of the land from a legal landscape in terms of responsibilities and obligations. It's really, really challenging to try to get people who are otherwise inclined to say yes, which seems so favorable, but it's really not helpful if it's not within, if it's not within. So I'm my hat's off to you for putting something together like this where you're really in the community with open ears and eyes and yet not overextending inappropriately, either from a jurisdictional framework or from what you really can do, the actionable components.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we didn't want to do, is show up empty-handed, like there's nothing that we can do for you. So in some of these communities, you could feel that we're going to run that risk. I really felt that way a bit for Lake Charles, which is why pushed really hard to get HUD and EPA to come with us, because there was so many of the issues right now are just people can't even, like, they can't even afford to eat and really get gas money to even get to come see us. So it was really in that community in particular, you still see not just the blue tarps on the roofs, but they're already tattered and like hanging off from like hurricanes 3 years ago, so and mold growing up the sides of walls and things. And so it's just like the issues are so much more fundamental than even what we can get to. But yeah, DOE is going to invest in the big industries that are there. We knew it was already coming. So it's like we have to be here. And so the only way we can do it is if we take a more comprehensive approach. So what I'll share about next, I think, is let me try and I heard that the funding is something I can probably with time that's left do funding or community benefit plans. Andrea, do you have a preference of which you'd like to hear for the group? Maybe
No preference. Just this is great. Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay, let me see. I'm sure this group is very well aware of the Justice 40 initiative, so I will not go over that. But what I will say is that DOE is taking a slightly different tact on how it defines benefits. So if my computer doesn't freeze, I'll be able to show this slide. If it does freeze, then I have it pretty well. Yeah, I just killed my PowerPoint. So I'll just speak to it while my PowerPoint reloads.
Sonrisa, we're seeing your calendar. I don't know if you want
to see my calendar.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
You're very busy.
Yeah, this week's a slower week. You can see my dog while it loads. Okay, so while it's loading, because my PowerPoint just crashed, that'll teach me for sharing a window or a screen instead of a window. Okay, so for everyone's aware of the Justice 40 initiative, I believe on this call, and the way that DOE is implementing it is well, first of all, the biggest trick on any Justice 40 thing is how you define a benefit, because it's 40% of the benefits that have to flow to communities. And so that's very confusing because a lot of the community are like thinking that it's going to be 40% of the funding. And so we have to back them off of that and say, no, it's 40% of the benefit. The best way I've been able to communicate that to the community is through community solar and say, well, look, if we build the garden, we could build it right in your neighborhood, but maybe you don't have enough room for that garden. So what if we build the garden in, a big field that's like maybe miles away from you, but you're receiving the benefit from that, even though, somebody else is receiving the dollars for building the unit. And that's the best way that I've been able to really describe the benefit language to them. But the bigger thing that we're doing is then like, okay, well, what is a benefit across all of these different DOE programs? And so we have 8 different policy priority areas that are defining benefit for us at DOE. And I am now back up, I think, and so I can show you at least what those are. So we have 2 of the goals or the policy priority areas are things that you're decreasing the bad. So decreasing environmental burden, decreasing energy burden. And then the other parts are increasing the good. And that's everything from like access to clean energy technology and low cost capital to wealth creation around enterprise and creation and jobs. And then the last 2 are all about resiliency and really like energy democracy. So how can we increase the resiliency overall? And then how can we make sure that we're having community-owned assets within these places? We are using the CGS tool now to identify the disadvantaged communities. So it's 40% of the benefit, as I just showed you how we define it, going to the disadvantaged communities. So using the CGS tool to define that. We have our own DOE tool that we use to prioritize within this because it's a smaller subset of communities. But just to finish out that idea. So, okay, so I told you how we defined the benefit. I told you how we are defining the disadvantaged communities. But what does that work for? It's only working for that competitive grant side of the programs, right? So DOE, its funding goes out in 2 main ways, either by formula that's stipulated by the legislature or through a competitive process where people can compete. So the community benefit plan process, which I'm about to tell you about, is applicable only to that competitive side. And then I'll go ahead and show you some of the competitive grants that we have available for community groups. I won't talk about, I don't know if I'll talk about formula grants, depends on what order my slides come up and how much time I have. But typically, this has been the process for DOE to be able to issue out funding, but also the places where anyone out in the public can be able to engage with DOE. You can do it in the request for information stage through a very formal feedback process. You can apply through a funding opportunity. And then finally, there's, if you were selected to be an awardee, you get the funding agreement. Well, what we've done now is, advance. I don't know why PowerPoint's being so finicky today. Okay, so what we've done is, and there's some elements of this we've had before, and then there's something that's new. So during the RFI, that's always been a thing. Publics, they give us a comment, they tell us how to adjust our requirements, our scoring criteria, request for information, RFI. What we've always had during the funding opportunity announcement and the award section, which is that second block, is have special reviewers, especially in our energy efficiency and renewable energy office. They started to require a diversity, equity, inclusion plan as being a part of the application. And with that, they introduced this concept of special reviewers for equity, we always had special reviewers, I mean, not always, but have had special reviewers for a long time for like construction and financing and things like that. Well, now we also have them for equity. And we've expanded this concept. Instead of just being DEIA, we now have introduced the community benefits plan, which is that third box. And now we've introduced four topics, which I'll put in there in a sec, or I'll tell you in a second. And then we've also made a mandatory requirement for reporting and evaluation on these community benefit plans. And because we at DOE don't give funding out all at once in one big tranche, we give it out in phases. And each phase has an evaluation period, and there's a go, no go element in there. We can use the reporting on the progress for the community benefit plans as a determinant of whether or not a project should continue to receive funding from DOE. This is our thing to recruit special merit reviewers. So if you want to be a special merit reviewer, you can take a QR code screenshot of this right now, and you can review any of our DOE FOAs that are coming forward for the community benefits plan, especially if you have expertise. Not just, you can have technical expertise in any of these areas, but then also if you have technical expertise in equity, then you can also be an equity reviewer. So we do them by office. We're working on integrating a process where these will all go into one single pool, and we're getting there slowly. But okay, so what is the community benefit plan? It's our new requirement. It's valued at 20% of the overall score of the application, and which is really significant. It actually can make a difference on who gets selected on a project. There's four main areas of it. You have to have SMART goals, which is specific, measurable, assignable, realistic time-bound goal per budget period of the project in order to or at least that's what the application is asking for. So the better your goals, the better your score. And then if you are selected, as I said before, it will be incorporated into the funding agreement and evaluated at the go, no go stops. And these are the four elements of that community benefit plan. So Justice 40 is one element, and how well the benefits are flowing from to disadvantaged communities. DEIA is there. We've added accessibility to it. And good jobs. And so this is where you're having a high quality job that is apprenticeship programs, worker voice in the safety, health and safety plans for the group, not blocking unions, and so on. And then the fourth element there, which is workforce and community agreements, which are a promise to create a formal agreement to do the goals or to implement your strategy of whatever you've promised in the other three. And so that's how you get scored on there. Yeah, Catherine, please.
Thank you. I'm curious, did you do this by rule? Did you do rulemaking at the Department of Energy to change your criteria for competitive funding? Or were
No, we just changed our FOA structure. So it's in all FOA language now. Anything that's funded by bill or IRA now has this. On the slide that I skipped, we have 144 covered programs for Justice 40 here at DOE. It's the most of any agency, but it's because climate change is one of the qualifying factors for the funding, and almost everything we do at DOE is climate change related. So most of our $100 billion that I mentioned earlier is covered by Justice 40, and then the community benefit plan goes into any project that is covered by Justice 40.
And are you
Almost.
prepared to share your slides with participants?
Yeah, I can share. I think I can share all of these. I have a huge deck, but everything I believe I can share all of these. I think they've all been publicly shared before.
And we'll also post a recording of this seminar and the slides on the iWest website. And I'll just put that in the link in the chat, and then you'll also get an email notification when they're posted.
Thank you.
Right, so I let this slide sit here, which shows how you get scored on the Justice 40 elements of that. And so how well you're identifying your disadvantaged communities, how well your goals are trackable, when the benefits are going to flow. Like, is it during construction, or is it during operations, or is it years after the project has actually been in operation? That's a really important thing to outline. And then you actually have to talk about, is there any negative impact of your project, and how are you going to mitigate for that as well? Then we also have the DEIA elements. So how well are you going to be partnering with HSIs, MSIs or HBCUs and other minority serving institutions, underrepresented businesses, minority business enterprises, women veteran-owned enterprises, and so on. How are you integrating them into your project team? So it's really about bringing people into your group or as partners. And then I already started to mention the good jobs and the high quality jobs section. So paying above average wages, making sure you have benefits for the construction jobs as well as the operation jobs, being able to join or form a union, the workforce training elements, and then the voice and the health and safety plan. And then I kind of spoke a little bit already to the different types of agreements that you can have and formalize things into it. So we're working on some of the reporting elements now, which I think are really important. I started to mention earlier on the air emissions, but now it's like we have community engagement, job quality, and the CDP elements, and like whether or not they're being met. So that's a very new element for us at DOE. The one things since I'm running out of time, I really want to highlight some of our community-facing funding. I'm going to show you probably this one real quick. I hope everyone here is familiar with the American Made Challenge website. This is a place where the majority of DOE's prizes live. So everyone here is familiar with the FOAs, and also I imagine you're all familiar with our funding opportunities, no FOAs for anyone in any other agency other than DOE. And so those can be really laborious for anyone to apply. Dozens of pages, hundreds of pages at times in just the application itself, let alone like just the FOA itself, let alone the application. And so prizes have created a lower barrier entry point for a lot of community groups to be able to pursue funding. And all of these offices have already been utilizing the American Made Challenge portal as a way to present their prizes. And so if you go to that, there's a real amazing video that we have that I won't have time to share with you. But you can see where most of these prizes are all being tracked. You can follow it, you can click and follow a prize to see when it's open again on the next round. You can let me actually keep going in here. You can apply directly from the site. You can see all of the deadlines in one spot and so on. And so this is kind of outlining what are the benefits of a prize versus the grant and how much more simplified the process is. It also comes out in smaller chunks of funding that are still significant amounts for community groups typically on the ground. And a lot of them also have phases, which unfortunately are still down select types of phases. But it is also kind of a point of like a maturation of an organization as they're maturing as an organization, usually they're able to kind of continue seeking some of that more advanced funding. I'm going to try and get ahead to some of the actual prizes themselves. Oops, I skipped one. So here's an example of one of them that we had done. We actually just went and visited the second line, Get Lit, Stay Lit, down in New Orleans. And that was a Inclusive Energy Innovation Prize winner. This is a really great program where people begin with technical assistance and then can advance through later phases and receive funding to actually implement their projects. There's incredible projects that are all in through here. We just heard from Green Door Initiative at a summit that we were at the last month. We have the Buildings Up Prize, where an organization, a nonprofit, can seek funding to improve the energy efficiency and weatherization of their own programs. There's the Rural and Remote Program Prize, where you can work to build energy infrastructure within your own rural community. It was a $15 million prize challenge for different individuals, organizations. They can develop partnership plans for innovative financing strategies and be able to help their communities improve their energy systems and clean energy demonstrations.
Sonrisa,
And so, yes.
someone has their hand up.
Oh, great.
Hi, I'm Mike Corianis. Just wondering, as you talk about these communities that, were funded and won, did they have one specific person or agency that wrote, this grant or, wrote this proposal to submit?
No, a lot of them have not. They are oftentimes writing on their own. Which is actually, I pulled the wrong slide, but to answer your question there, I don't know how many people here are familiar with the EPA's Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, which is a really huge opportunity. And I can't believe I didn't bring a slide on it because I almost always talk about it. But it's the EPA funded so far 17 different technical assistance centers. We call them the TIC-TACs. The acronym for it is TCTAC. And these are being funded directly by EPA to provide exactly that kind of assistance for these groups to help them be able to pursue funding. And so they're being able to get coached by a local organization or university that's going to be able to help them pursue these funds. DOE has partnered with EPA, and we co-funded the TIC-TACs in particular for that rural and remote program I was just talking about, as well as a different one that we have for mine lands, for energy communities on mine lands. And so, yeah, it's a huge challenge for these community groups to be able to pursue some of these funds.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I know I'm running out of time, and so I'm leaving you with maybe this slide, and then I'll share one other just for, I think I have how to sign up. Maybe not. I might have cut it. Oh no, I did have it. Okay. So this is our new Office of State and Community Energy Programs. That's what SCEP stands for. And they got a lot of funding for community relevant and community facing programs. This is a mix of formula funding and competitive funding that I had mentioned before. The 8.8 billion is the energy rebates. And so this is all, and the biggest thing to say about energy rebates is it's scaled. So if you have a lower income, you can receive a higher amount of rebate. And so that's important to know. The weatherization program got a good bump of 3.5 billion. And then all of these other programs, let's see, the energy efficiency conservation block grants, the state energy program, and the energy codes for technical assistance. Those three are all going through like local governments. And so that's a really great opportunity where they still either compete for the funds or some of it's through formula, and they can actually get that local money and get it drawn down directly to cities and counties rather than it going through the state per se, which is what the rebates and the weatherization programs do. So as a final slide, you can sign up for updates from our office, and this was actually something that we didn't have in time for the first 2 roadshow stops that we will have from here on out, where you can actually text us, text to that number and use any one of the keywords below, and then you get information from us as a text alert, or you can enroll your email to get email updates from us on any of the work that we do going forward. So with that, I know I'm at time or maybe a minute over, and so I just want to thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here and to speak with you all, and feel free to reach out to me anytime with questions, conversation, comments, and all that kind of good stuff. And thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Sonrisa. This was fantastic. I just want to thank everyone for participating. A recording of the seminar will be available on the events page of the iWest website, and the link is on the screen. I would encourage everyone to join us for the next seminar, which will be Wednesday, September 13th, and the topic will be orphaned wells. So with that, I'll just end the seminar and thank everyone again for joining.
Thank you.